Hey, what's going on, Internet? It is Thursday, late night. It is time for a new episode of LonsTV. I wasn't even busy today. I wasn't really even doing that much. I knew I wanted to watch The American, which is the movie I'm going to review on the show, and then I just took forever dilly-dallying before I actually threw it in. I didn't end up putting it in until after 8, so it's not like 10:30 and I'm rushing to get LonsTV done before the midnight arbitrary deadline, which I have made up and then consistently try to hit for no real practical reason. But before I get into The American, I wanted to talk about the X-Men New Class trailer that I checked out today. It went up online today. Everybody was talking about it. I seem to have a more negative take on it than most. I didn't hate it, but just to start out, I'm a little prejudiced against the movie. I'm sort of starting out thinking it might not be so great just because Matthew Vaughn is involved, and I've never really liked one of his movies as a director. As a producer, he did a lot of the Guy Ritchie early movies that I liked a lot. As a director, he did Layer Cake, which I thought was really derivative of Guy Ritchie movies and just didn't feel particularly interesting or original. Had a great cast, and it just kind of didn't really use them to very good effect. Then he did Stardust, which was a Neil Gaiman adaptation that I thought was pretty terrible, just like clunky, sort of comedy fantasy, but just stupid. Trying to be sort of silly and light, and then just coming off kind of dumb. And he's done maybe one or two other things that I'm forgetting, but then he did Kick-Ass last year, which I really didn't like as well, and I just thought was cloying and stupid and real sitcom-y, especially when it was just the teenagers and oh, she thinks I'm gay, and just really awkward. And it just seems like he's trying so desperately to be cool and to appeal to fanboys and to give people relentlessly what they want rather than actually defining a style of his own. And I do see how he could fall into that trap again with X-Men New Class. So I'm trying to be cautiously optimistic because I like X-Men movies. I especially like the second one that Bryan Singer did, X2. And I do love the period retro 60s setting. I don't know why more comic book movies don't do period stuff. I mean, most of these stories have been around, they started from the 30s to the 50s or 60s, which means there's, 30, 40 years of stories from all different eras that they could be using, and it just seems lame that we're going to have this huge collection of movies for every comic book character, but they're all going to be set in, from the early aughts to, now. And, I guess you have, Burton's films that are sort of timeless. Burton's Batman movies don't exist in a certain time, and Superman was the 70s and 80s, but for the most part, it's all just relentlessly today, trying to make it real contemporary, and I don't get that. Fantastic Four is another example of a franchise that would be better, just makes more sense in a Cold War 60s sort of environment than it does today. I think that's part of the problem that a lot of these movies are facing. Anyway, so I love that they're doing 60s X-Men and that they're really the fashion and JFK voiceover, and they're really getting into the era. That's probably my favorite thing about the trailer. You know what I mean? I think January Jones, there were some good casting decisions. It does have James McAvoy, and it's sort of irrational, my dislike of him, but he just bores me. Every time he shows up in a movie, it's almost like there's always interesting characters, and then we don't get to watch them. We instead have to watch James McAvoy. Last King of Scotland, you have Forrest Whitaker doing that great Idi Amin, and then you have James McAvoy, who's super boring, and we follow him the whole time. And ditto Last Station about, you had Christopher Plummer doing this great sort of job playing old Tolstoy, but you don't get to follow him. You're really following James McAvoy all the time. And it's he's always just dead-eyed and blank, and I just don't get it. So I don't want to follow him for a whole movie. I'm sure there's going to be interesting characters along the sides, like Jennifer Lawrence as Mystique, but we're going to relentlessly focus on James McAvoy, which always seems to happen. I don't get that. So anyway, there's some good, some bad. I didn't love the effects either, but I'll stop whining about the X-Men First Class trailer. I'm obviously going to see it, so, take this for what it's worth. I just wanted to chat about it, and there's some stuff that's kind of rubbing me the wrong way. I'm not as excited about that as I am for, say, Captain America or Thor, which both of those, based on the trailers, I'm very excited to see. Okay, moving on. It's been half the episode I talk about a trailer. Let's talk about The American, Anton Corbijn's film from last year. George Clooney plays a hitman, and he kind of has a rough assignment. It doesn't end well. So he, takes off, and his sort of contact or his boss sends him to this little town in Italy. Lay low, I'll call you, I've got a new assignment there, and it turns out he's going to help another assassin. He's an assassin, but he's going to stay in this town and help another assassin build a special weapon for a special assassination that's being planned. The word about this movie when it first came out was that it was really, really, really slow. That's what every single review was like, oh, it's so slow and it takes forever for things to happen. So I sort of braced myself for that. You know, you do like, I sometimes like movies that are a lot more deliberate, but you sort of get in that mindset of like, okay, I'm going to give this movie some time and I'm going to let it sort of suck me in and I'm not going to be impatient, unlike if you were watching some dumb American, you know, mainstream thing and you'd be like, okay, entertain me. But actually, it turned out to be a lot less slow than I expected. I mean, it's deliberately paced. It's not like a fast-paced movie, but I don't know. There's enough incident, I think, to keep you sort of going. And if it wasn't paced like this, it's almost like Clooney's character's motivations wouldn't make that much sense. Like, he makes a lot of choices, and I'll try to say spoiler-free, but while he's in this town and he's sort of waiting and he's hiding out and he's really bored, and he's not, you know, he can't really get to know people or start a life there because, you know, he doesn't want anyone to know who he is or what he does. He's there for covert reason. So he's really just stuck in this hotel room or driving around. He sort of befriends the local priest just for someone to talk to. And if it wasn't sort of slow and you didn't kind of, you wouldn't get to feel his frustration and loneliness and isolation, which is then what explains what he does in the second half of the film. He would be acting irrationally if you didn't understand his mindset of being sort of trapped in this room and doing push-ups all day and building this gun and not having anything else to do. So actually, I thought that was very effective, and it really does put you in. The Clooney character's name is Jack in the movie. You don't know if that's his real name, but it really does put you into his mindset in the last sort of half hour, 40 minutes. You get, like, he'd rather do pretty much anything else than return to the tedium of, like, sitting in rooms waiting to get phone calls about future assignments. And I also love, the movie's just beautifully shot, beginning to end. But I love how Corbijn, the Italian countryside is simultaneously really, like, threatening and sinister and also really beautiful and picturesque. I mean, you get a lot of these shots of Clooney driving and you get the sun coming up over the mountains, and it's really beautiful, and there's a lot of scenes set by this river, and the sun comes in, and it's, you know, like, the light bouncing off the trees, and it's really beautiful, but he also plays it how these, you know, pretty sunny scenes, there's something ominous behind them, and it gives you a lot of insight into Clooney and Jack's character, that, you know, these beautiful women, and he's not sure if he can trust them throughout the whole movie. And so it is kind of that idea of, like, everything beautiful has something really, like, ominous and sinister behind it, and he almost, like, distrusts things that are too good or that he enjoys too much. He has to turn away from pleasures like that, and that's a lot of the theme of the movie, and it's just really well realized in the cinematography. It's trying, obviously, to recall films like Jean-Pierre Melville's, like Le Samurai, or those kind of 60s, very stylish, very cool and sort of reserved crime thrillers. It's obviously not as good as, like, Melville or Le Samurai, with the one of the great sort of gangster assassin crime movies of all time, but it's as close as any director, I think, in the last 10, 15 years has come to that particular style, which is not that popular. I mean, Jarmusch, I guess, in Ghost Dog is kind of going for something similar, and that was a good movie too. And this is sort of in that vein, and it's just well done, and it's rare to see a movie that is like about a hitman that actually has a little bit of that Melville, Alain Delon kind of cool to it. You know, most of them are just like bang, bang, turns into big action, shoot 'em up by the end, no matter what. The final thing I want to talk about with this movie is I feel like this is almost the third entry in a George Clooney trilogy, like the lonely, sad, professional guy trilogy. You had, like, Michael Clayton, and then Up in the Air, and now this film, and they're all like, he's an expert in his field, and it makes it so he can't form personal one-on-one relationships. Like, that's the plot of all these movies, and it's almost, at this point, a little bit like a George Clooney, like, cry for help. Like, he feels isolated by his job, and he's unable to form real connections with people. That's all I can surmise from his choice of roles, which seems to revisit that notion again and again. And I don't get it. He doesn't have a crime boss that's going to shoot him in the head if he tries to quit. George Clooney, retire. Enjoy yourself. I mean, I like your movies, but if it's really making you this unhappy. So on that note, I think George Clooney should follow his spirit and do what he feels. And that's this episode of LonsTV. A good message for everybody. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I'm almost out of time, so I'm going to go quickly. Thanks, everybody, for subscribing, and I will see you all back here tomorrow.